Hey everyone, welcome to the conversation. I'm your sometimes host, Francesca Fiorentini. I am back today and I'm very excited to talk with our first guest because, as we all know, 2020 has been a year full of discussing why we can't dismantle the prison industrial complex. But it exists. It exists and it is not a compassionate place, prison. And to answer for that, we have a filmmaker and the executive director of the Compassion Prison Project, Fritzi Horstman. Fritzi, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Francesca. It's great to be here.
Now, I said to answer the problem of compassion in prison, but that's not exactly what the Compassion Prison Project does. So why don't you just tell us what you all do?
So our mission at the Compassion Prison Project is to bring communities and prisons compassionate action, and bring compassion to the prisons right now. That's our focus right now. Compassion to the prisons, but it's the Compassion Prison Project is what I want to explain. It's not the Compassion Prisoner Project, because in prisons, what we're seeing is that everyone in prison is traumatized, and the men and women that are living there come from horrendous backgrounds. Most of them, I believe, if you get into prison, the way you get into prison is through trauma. And I really want to explain something about what trauma does to the brain, body, and spirit. There's a thing called adverse childhood experiences. It's an ACE quiz created by Vincent Folletti and Robert Anda from the CDC and Kaiser Permanente. And there are 10 questions, and you can go to our website and take the ACE quiz. There are 10 questions, and they range from domestic abuse, the childhood traumas of, gosh, I'm a little nervous, but adverse childhood experiences include physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, which is one of the worst things, physical and emotional neglect, substance abuse or alcoholism, parents who have mental illness, parents or home, people in the home who've gone to prison.
Sure.
I have 8 ACEs, and in the United States, 12% of the United States people have four or more ACEs. In prison, it's 70 to 80%. And people who have 6 or more ACEs, it's 64% in the prisons. So the amount of trauma that the people come into prison with, and so we're talking often or very often. These traumatic events happen often or very often to the men and women who have suffered in childhood before they're 18.
Right.
And when you have that much trauma, you're in a state of fight or flight for most of your life. And you can't get into your prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is where you understand about consequences. You understand right from wrong. You understand that's where your moral center is. But when you're committing crimes, this isn't available to you. The prefrontal cortex isn't available to you. So what happens is you commit a crime and you're put in prison for the rest of your life, and you may not have even realized what happened to you because of the amount of stress that your body is under.
Sure. Yes. And all of that, of course, is compounded by institutional racism and historic inequity. And then you've got the prison system in and of itself, which, of course, re-traumatizes in all different ways. So what specifically and concretely do you do with incarcerated people?
Well, before COVID, we were going in every 3 weeks, bringing them treats, sitting there for 7 hours in circle, talking about their trauma, talking about what's going on in their lives. And then we created a thing called the Giving Back Project, where they start building bridges back to their communities, giving them agency and a sense of accomplishment. One of the guys is creating a STEM class for underserved youth in his community. And there are examples of that all over the place. The other thing we're doing now is an initiative we have called Adopt a Prison. We're going to do a pilot program in 4 different prisons, 2 on the West Coast, 2 on the East Coast. And the idea is to bring trauma-informed, trauma-responsive care to all the men and women working and living in prison. And that means everyone knows what trauma is, everybody knows how it affects the brain, body, and spirit, and everybody knows that when someone is acting out, it's not because they're morally corrupt or inept. It's not because they're bad people. It's because they're triggered. And this is on both sides of the bars. The men and women that are working there, the life expectancy of a correctional officer in the United States is 59 years old. That presents as having six or more ACEs. So the life expectancy of somebody who has six or more ACEs, now this is comorbidity. This is what we're seeing in our hospitals. Yeah. We're seeing people are traumatized. And when you live in that state of trauma, when you're in a hyper vigilant state, your body has no time to build an immune system. Toxic chemicals like cortisol and adrenaline flood your body when you're in a hypervigilant state. And so imagine being in a prison, walking in that door, you may not come out there by the end of the day. And that's the same with the people living in prison. And the only way you can heal from trauma is if you're feeling safe. So if you're not feeling safe, how are you going to heal? And this goes for a lot of the people in the United States, because remember, 64% of Americans have had one or more ACE. And so, and for me, I'm still recovering from my traumatic childhood.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, yes, about, how you got into this work, but also just the work feels at such odds with the way that our prison system treats incarcerated people, just institutionally, in terms of treating them like they are animals or like they are dangerous or like, all kinds of combined and just violently treating them. So how do you address that and sort of counter that from within the system?
Such great question. The first thing I want to point out is that the three biggest mental health facilities in the United States are the LA County Jail, Cook County Jail in Chicago, and Rikers Island. Wow. So those are our mental health facilities. And instead of treating them with care and de-escalating the situation, the people in corrections are trained to go to war every day. They are trained to face the enemy. I was told when I was being reprimanded for some of the things I've done, because I like to be nice to people in prison, I was told that we're on one side of the line. And I don't believe there is a side of the line, because I believe that we're all in this together. And the health of a correctional officer is just as important as the health of an incarcerated man or woman. And if we want a safe society, we have to really focus on bringing mental health to everyone working and living in prison. I mean, that's what's up right now, because the people that are coming back to us are not they're in worse shape than when they arrived. They're being traumatized and re-traumatized. They're not getting the help they need, the mental health. So it's 75 to 80% of the men and women in prison have mental health issues. That's depression, that's anxiety, that's schizophrenia, et cetera. And so it's a mental health crisis. This is not and as I explained earlier, this isn't a question of morality anymore. This is a question of how, and this is systemic. Gandhi said, poverty is the worst form of violence. Poverty is violence. When we're a rich nation and we can take care of everybody, but we have grain growing fallow, farmers being subsidized to not give food to people. So it's like,
I wanted to, before we close the interview, I wanted to just show, because there is a documentary that you've been working on. You yourself are a filmmaker, and the Compassion Project has been captured by the forthcoming documentary called Step Inside the Circle. And I wanted to just show a clip of that.
Awesome. Thank you.
If you often felt that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, step inside the circle. If your family lived in extreme poverty, step inside the circle. Step inside the circle. Step inside the circle. Step inside the circle.
There is no shame. There is no shame.
That is a clip from Step Inside the Circle, which captures the Compassion Prison Project. Fritzy, what drew you to this work? you sort of touched on it, but I wanted to ask, like, why this work for you? You're a filmmaker, and now this.
5 years ago, I started writing a musical about prisons, and I don't understand why, but it's been people underserved, the most vulnerable population has always fascinated me, and I could never understand, even when I was a little girl, why we have homeless people or, women working on the street, sleeping with men. It made no sense to me. So I've always had this sense that something terrible is wrong. And I've always been waiting for someone to, do something about it, and no one has. So I walked into a prison in 2018. I said, when are we coming back? And they said 6 months. And I'm like, this is not the good schedule. I said, I got to do something. And I walked in there January 5th, 2019. And this is what we've done in about 2 years. So within the next year, half the prisons in the United States are going to be trauma informed and trauma responsive. And in 3 years, they're all going to be healing centers, and our society is going to shift. And let's keep talking about it, and I will give you progress reports because it's on.
I so hope so. Fritzi Horstman, filmmaker, executive director of the Compassion Prison Project, actually enacting rehabilitation and almost a sort of defund the violent police state within it, because it can be changed radically. Thank you so much for joining us, Fritzi, and thanks for your work.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. We really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.